The storm had been trying to kill them for 6 hours before Sera Dunne decided it wasn't going to win. She gripped the overhead rail of the rescue tender Ardent Shore as another cross-swell hit, the hull bucking hard enough to snap her teeth together. Through the forward viewport, the atmosphere of Thurath Roman 4 looked nothing like a gas giant should. It looked like the inside of a grinding machine. The pressure bands that had been stable for 11 years had collapsed 2 days ago in what the Thurath Atmospheric Authority was calling a catastrophic coherence failure, and the word catastrophic was doing a lot of work. Winds in excess of 400 kilometers per hour. Lightning that didn't flicker but held steady like pillars of white fire. And somewhere in the middle of it, a Thurath research station with 19 personnel aboard and a hull that had been rated for Class 2 events, not Class 7. Sera, the voice in her earpiece was Chief Petty Officer Marco Tells, currently strapped into the navigation console 2 meters behind her. "I've got the station beacon again. It's shifted. 200 kilometers south-southwest from our last fix." That was the problem with atmospheric rescue work. The station wasn't anchored. It was floating. The Thurath built their deep atmosphere research platforms as buoyant structures, designed to drift with the current layers. In stable conditions, that was elegant engineering. In a Class 7, the station was a leaf in a river. "South-southwest puts it deeper into the pressure band," said Ensign Dav Renault from the helm. He was 22 and had been piloting atmospheric tenders for 14 months, which made him the most experienced helm officer available for a Class 7, because nobody else on the roster had atmospheric hours at all. "I know," Sera said. "That's the band where we lost telemetry on Sweep 3. "I know that too." She moved to the navigation console and looked at the plot. The beacon trace was intermittent, appearing for 30 seconds, dropping for 3 minutes, reappearing shifted. The station was tumbling. Not catastrophically, because the beacon was still transmitting, but enough to indicate that the buoyancy controls were fighting hard and losing ground. The Thurath had not expected anyone to come. That was the thing she kept turning over in her mind, as the Ardent Shore fought through a cross-current that pushed them 40 degrees off course before Renault corrected. The Thurath Atmospheric Authority's distress signal had been a standard automated broadcast, the kind that any relay within range would pick up and log. But the Authority's own rescue fleet was grounded. 3 of their 4 operational tenders had been docked for refit, and the 4th had made one approach and turned back at the Class 4 boundary. The coherence failure had jumped 2 classification levels in 6 hours. No one had anticipated a Class 7. The Thurath hadn't directed their signal at humanity. Their primary emergency contact protocol ran through the Galactic Compact's Safety Directorate, which had a response queue and a risk assessment process, and a category threshold for atmospheric event response that a Class 7 exceeded by 2 orders of magnitude. The Compact's Safety Directorate had logged the beacon, classified the event as non-respondable, and entered a welfare monitoring status, which meant they would continue to log the beacon until it stopped transmitting. The EAS Ardent Shore had picked up the broadcast relay in transit 8 hours out. Their manifest listed them as a search and rescue tender running between stations on a routine equipment transfer. The tender carried 9 crew members, an emergency medical bay, a tethered submersible rated for Class 4 atmospheric pressure events, and a hull that had been stress-tested to the upper edge of Class 6. Sera had called her captain, Lieutenant Orindo, and pointed at the plot. "We're 8 hours out, and the Compact has flagged it non-respondable," she'd said. "They're probably right," Orindo said. He was 38 and had done atmospheric rescue for 12 years, which meant he understood exactly what he was looking at. A Class 7 exceeded by the projections. 19 personnel. Buoyant station, no anchor, no position fix. "They're bioluminescent species," Sera had said. "The Thurath, they're adapted to the deep pressure layers." They can survive the interior if the hull holds. The hull is rated for Class 2. The deep band layers are below the worst of the shear. If the stations drifted into the lower band, the pressure goes up but the lateral shear drops off. The hull might actually be safer down there than it was at nominal depth. Orindo had looked at the plot for a long moment. He was the one who was supposed to say no. She knew that. He had the authority, the experience, the years of knowing when a scenario exceeded safe bounds. He also had 12 years of finding that the edge of safe bounds was rarely where the manual said it was. 8 hours, he said. We start our approach. We reassess at the Class 4 boundary. If conditions exceed our hull rating by more than 15%, we abort. Understood. He'd gone to the bridge. She'd gone to the equipment bay and started checking the tether systems. That had been 6 hours ago. They were well past the Class 4 boundary now, and the conditions had exceeded their hull rating by 31%, and they had not aborted. The Ardent Shore shuddered through another pressure shift, and somewhere in the equipment bay, something that should have been secured came loose and hit the deck with a crash loud enough to be heard over the storm noise. Sera registered it and didn't move. Whoever was closest to the bay would deal with it. She was watching the beacon trace. 30 seconds on, 3 minutes dark, back on, shifted again. Station is descending, said Petty Officer Lynn at the sensor console. She was 19 and had joined the SAR rotation 6 weeks ago on a volunteer transfer from a cargo tender. The buoyancy is failing. It's dropping into the lower pressure band. That might help us, Sera said, if it drops below the main shear layer. Or it compresses past tolerance in. Lynn, tell me what the depth readout says. A pause. 4.3 kilometers below nominal operating depth, dropping at approximately 30 meters per minute. Sera did the math. At 30 meters per minute, the station had about 12 minutes before it hit the lower pressure band floor, where the compression would make the hull rating question academic. 12 minutes, plus whatever transit time they needed to close the remaining distance to the beacon fix. She walked forward to stand beside Renault. How fast can you take us through the shear layer? He didn't look away from his instruments. Full thrust, direct approach, maybe 7 minutes to close to tether range. But the shear layer's going to try to roll us. If we get caught broadside in a roll during the descent, we can't recover. What's the chance of getting caught broadside? In a Class 7, I'd normally say 40%. What would you call this? Renault glanced at the external pressure sensors, and then at the attitude indicator, which had been making distressing suggestions for the past 20 minutes. I'd call this a 53% chance of a bad roll. And if we go around the shear layer? 22 minutes, the station has 12. She thought about Orindo, who had made his decision 6 hours ago and hadn't changed it yet. She thought about the 19 Thurath researchers in that station, bioluminescent deep-pressure species, adapted to the dense atmosphere layers, but not invulnerable to compression past their own tolerance. She thought about the compact's Safety Directorate, logging the beacon every hour in a welfare monitoring queue. Direct approach, she said. I'll take the tether manual controls. You keep us on attitude. Sera. 7 minutes, Dav. Call the roll if it comes. We'll handle it when it does. She didn't have a good argument for the 53%. She knew that. The number was what it was, but the 12-minute window was also what it was, and sometimes the job was picking between two bad numbers and choosing the one that still left a chance. She clipped into the tether station and ran the system check. The tethered submersible was a cone-shaped extraction unit rated for 6 passengers per run. 19 Thurath. 3 runs minimum, 4 if any were injured. At roughly 4 minutes per run cycle, she was looking at 16 minutes of tether operation minimum. The station had 12 minutes before it hit the floor. If the station hit the lower band floor, hull survival probability dropped to around 30%. 30% was not good. 30% was also not zero. The Ardent Shore hit the shear layer, and the storm tried to kill them. It started as a lateral oscillation that Renault caught early and corrected hard, swinging the bow into the wind vector to take the roll on the nose instead of the side. The correction worked for the first wave. The second wave came from a different angle, the kind of multi-vector shear the Class 7 models had predicted, and that nobody with working professional judgment had ever attempted. The hull screamed, not a mechanical sound, but the actual resonance frequency of stressed hull plates under asymmetric load, a tone that human inner ears registered as wrongness before the brain could process what it was. Tells called out bearing changes from the navigation console, updating the beacon fix in real time. Lynn called out the station's depth. Renault flew. Sera watched the tether board and kept her hands on the manual release, ready to deploy the moment they were within range. The shear layer took 6 minutes 40 seconds instead of 7. When they cleared it, the external sensors returned to something that qualified as readable, and Lynn said, in the voice of someone who has just revised a significant assumption, "Station is at 4.9 kilometers below nominal. Holding." "Holding," Sera said. "It hit a density inversion layer. It's buoyant against the lower boundary." "Hull reads intact. I'm getting power signature. Life sign indicators are intermittent but present." Sera exhaled once, short and controlled, and deployed the cable. The tether run was the part nobody who didn't do this job ever understood. Every simulation made it look like a systems problem. Match frequencies, hold position, extend the tether, lock the collar, transfer personnel. What the simulation didn't replicate was doing it in a Class 7, with the tender being shoved around by residual shear, while the submersible descended on a cable that wanted to swing like a pendulum, and the docking target was moving in 3 dimensions against a density boundary. Sera ran it manually. The submersible's automated docking system had tripped an error code on the second shear wave, which meant its alignment assist was offline, which meant she was flying the cone off a pressure differential gauge and a visual feed that kept cutting out. First run, 6 Thurath. They came out of the station's docking port in the order they'd been told. The protocol, she learned later, had been set by the station's senior researcher, a Thurath named Veth, who had organized the personnel into extraction groups during the 6 hours they'd been waiting for someone to come. Veth had put the junior researchers in the first group, the injured in the second. Second run, 6 more. One of them had a fractured arm from when the buoyancy controls had failed, and the station had pitched hard into its first descent. Tells met them at the tender's docking collar with the medical kit. The Thurath were bioluminescent. Their skin carried light, pale blue-green and gentle, the kind of illumination that made the medical bay look like the inside of a lantern when 3 of them were in it simultaneously. Sera registered this from the periphery of her attention and filed it away for later. Third run. The density inversion layer shifted on the 4th minute of the 3rd descent. The station dropped 18 meters in 11 seconds, and the tether pulled taut at the wrong angle and the submersible inverted. Sera caught it barely, recovering attitude at the cost of 20 seconds and a cable stress reading that went red before coming back down to amber. She redocked on the second attempt. The submersible took on the remaining 5 Thurath. Veth was the last one. He was older than she'd expected. Thurath showed age in the dimming of their bioluminescence, the light going from bright and steady to something softer and more intermittent, like a signal on a fading battery. He was the last one because he had organized the groups that way. He came through the collar and stood in the docking bay of the Ardent Shore and looked at Sera for a moment in the way that people sometimes look at someone when they are trying to understand what they are seeing. She didn't have time to explain. The density layer shifted again, and the station dropped 460 meters in a single event, and the tether hit maximum extension, and the release system triggered automatically, severing the cable. The station's beacon transmitted for another 40 seconds, and then stopped. Orindo's voice came over the intercom. "Retract confirmed. All personnel aboard. I'm taking us up." 17 Thurath, not 19. Two of them had been in the research bay when the first buoyancy failure pitched the station, and the hull breach that followed had been. Veth explained this later, in the medical bay, in a translation that came out careful and precise, survivable only for the bioluminescent species at depth. And there had not been time, and he had made the decision about extraction order knowing this, and he did not ask Sera to tell him he had made the right one. She didn't tell him that. She sat with him for a while in the medical bay while the Ardent Shore climbed out of the atmosphere, and she didn't say much of anything, and neither did he, and the light in his skin was very quiet. The Compact's Safety Directorate updated its welfare monitoring log 8 hours later, when the Ardent Shore's after-action transmission cleared the relay. The log noted that the event had resolved with 17 survivors recovered by an Earth search and rescue vessel operating outside declared response parameters. The case was closed. No citation was issued. The Safety Directorate's citation protocols applied to member species, and Earth Aid Corps crews were not members. The welfare monitoring log did not have a category for what the Ardent Shore had done. The Safety Directorate's event classification system ran to 37 categories, covering every response type the Compact had documented in 400 years of operation. It added a 38th. In the Thurath language, the term they created was long and technical and rooted in atmospheric mechanics. The translation, rendered into the Compact's standard tongue by a junior clerk who found himself staring at his screen for a long moment after finishing it, came out as "Response against the storm." The clerk filed the translation and went home. The case closed. The storm on Thurath Roman 4 raged for another 9 days and then collapsed into ordinary weather. 17 people were alive who, according to every protocol the galaxy had written, were supposed to be a welfare monitoring entry and nothing more. Sera Dunne filed her equipment damage report, noted the tether cable as a total loss, and put in a requisition for a replacement. She was 24 years old. She didn't think of it as anything except the job.